and the others as well.
Sure. Well, I actually got involved in politics, slowly. I mean, when my daughter was very young, my first daughter, so about 24 years ago, I first got involved with the Libertarian Party. I'd never been involved in politics before and didn't know anything about it, but I had been listening to a radio host on local, well, it wasn't local radio, New York City radio, actually, when I lived in New Jersey, and his name was Gene Burns, and he would call himself a libertarian, and he was a very smart and good explainer of various ideas, and I found myself, agreeing with him a lot. So I said, well, I maybe I should get involved with the Libertarian Party if I'm a libertarian. And of course, when you do that, you learn everything wrong about politics pretty much. But I did have a good mentor in the, about 20 years ago when I first got involved with Libertarian Party from Philadelphia, who had been involved with politics for a very long time. I learned a lot about him, and he's now since deceased, unfortunately, but he taught me the importance of getting involved locally, and I understood, and it really resonated with me how important that was, and I decided that was going to be my focus, is trying to develop things locally, and actually there was a group of us in the Libertarian Party who was trying to get the Libertarian Party to focus on local grassroots development of the party, and we could not change that culture, which was very entrenched to a different type of culture, and I realized there was really no future there, which of course history proved me correct, and I decided to get involved with the Republican Party because it was the next best party matching my ideas and my values. So, and I found it's been much more satisfying and fulfilling working through the Republican Party, especially where I live, because it's very conservative. And I've realized how important it is to work in primary elections, because here, Republicans always win in the general election. So if you're not involved in the primary, you have no impact in the result of elections. And also throughout my, travels in local politics, I just from being around and trying to learn about things, I was surprised how much of a difference you can make in local things just by showing up. And I've heard, anecdotal stories about this, repeatedly, and, the things that we have done as individuals and small groups is really astounding. If people had any idea how easy it was to have an impact at the local level, I think they would be much more involved. But everything bubbles up from the local level. The reason why things are so crazy at the top is because politics and government has become so top heavy. All the money goes upward, all the attention is at the top, and the government has become much more centralized, so there's a lot at stake, and that's where all the money goes, and also because of campaign finance, but that's another story. So for all these reasons, but it'll never change the fact that unless we stop having local elections, that and the way we elect politicians, which is still locally, it'll never change the fact that you need local organization in order to make a difference, unless you're a billionaire, which most of us will never be. So, but throughout all this time, I've had just repeated experiences how much the local involvement is important and how much it's neglected and how we suffer the consequences of that.
And I'll tell you who's waking up to that, Lois. Based on the last election and his reports, friends filed reports with me, the Dems are out big time in November across Pennsylvania. They had a strategy and they worked it well, as we know by the results. And so as you state, all politics is local, and that's just not a slogan. Do you think the Republicans are losing an edge there? Do you think they need to do some regrouping and come back on strong?
In Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Well, again, I shouldn't say this, but I don't have a lot of confidence in the state party in Pennsylvania. We need to develop our parties at the county level. That's the most important level of the party, because that's the level of the party that gets the vote out. And to the degree we're organized at the local level, that's the degree we'll be successful there, unless we get just a little bit lucky, which we did in 2016. We got a little bit lucky because this sort of backfired, but it was because of the national media. And even though they were against Trump, they just could not, it was like a love-hate relationship. You know, they just couldn't stop covering him. And that helped Trump. And we got a little lucky in 2016. But, you know, the thing that I try to tell people is that there will never be another Trump. That you know, you can't rely on having a bigger, larger than life figure like that every 4 years. It's not going to happen. So we have to get better at the business of politics, the organizational business, so we can help our candidates win, who are less larger than life in the future. And politics is actually a very mechanical process. Once you understand what you need to do, you can repeat it every election. It's not different. It's always the same. So if you understand what needs to be done, you just kind of plug in your formula and you just go. You still need good candidates, and that's another topic. But you need good candidates. But we've had a lot of good candidates that we didn't get elected. So, you know, you can have a good candidate, but if they can't get their message out, if you can't get people out to vote, you won't get them elected. So all these pieces of the puzzle need to come together.
Lois, you can't dismiss the recent report of 12,000 illegal voters found in Pennsylvania.
We've known this for now at least a year and a half in Pennsylvania, that we had, because of motor voter, we've been registering illegals to vote. And this is just one of the dangers of this automatic voter registration. And we knew that. And the counties, we were asked this is another example of Republican State Committee. We were asked to go to our county boards of election and our commissioners and have them write to the Department of State about how many undocumented people there were that they registered to vote in our county. And you know, people just, our local people just dropped the ball again. But we have to be more attentive to this. And you know, you might want to get on your show sometime is Commissioner Al Schmidt from Philadelphia, because he's the one that broke that story. He's the one that discovered it, and there was actually a recorded hearing online he had with the legislature about it. But he was the one that broke the story. He's the one that told us at the Republican State Party that we could help him try to rectify the problem. But you know, once you register these people, you know, then you've got this problem. Now, how are you going to fix it? It's not that easy.
No, certainly it's not. I was at a Republican event Saturday night. Some guy told me when he went to the DMV, do you want to vote? Do you want to register to vote? I already am. Do you want to change your party? No, I'm already registered to vote. Oh, okay. He's like, this happens all the time. It happens all the time. And I was like, boy, things sure have changed, because when I registered to vote, that option was not available. You had to get these slips and you had to fill them out, and it wasn't hard, but it was controlled.
Yeah.
It just seems like all heck has broken loose. And that's something that I guess needs to be addressed in your talk, how citizens can be involved in correcting the voting irregularities, Lois. I know we had talked before that there are some basic things that we can do to ensure that voting is done decently and in order as properly as it can be. Can you recount that for me?
Yes. Well, every election, anybody can become a volunteer poll watcher, and you can either be a poll watcher on behalf of a candidate or on behalf of a political party. Either of those entities or people can get you a poll watcher certificate. You need to be certified by your board of elections to do that. And these requests usually have to go in about a month before the election, because it's a process, you know, to certify a person for poll watching. And there are poll watcher trainings. I think there's some information online at the Department of State, but there are people that are trained to do this, and it can, you know, tell you what to look for. But you can go in on on election day in your polling place, and you can observe the process and make sure it's done correctly. And then poll watching is also done for a get out the vote purpose as well as a separate function, and that's done through your party or through a political candidate. And those are two separate functions, but a poll watcher can do both or one or the other. And they're the only people really allowed in the polling place besides the constables or the sheriff or somebody like that on election day. And you need that certificate, and you go in and you know, there are, like I said, you need to understand how the polling place works. So before you can be helpful in doing that, but you know, you can get that training through the candidate you're working with or through the party, or there are other people that do those types of trainings. And you know, if people out there want to do something like that, we can arrange something in their area. But that's one, because if somebody's coming to vote who's not eligible, you know, you can contest that person right there in the polling place if you don't think they're a legitimate voter. And you know, you can then there's a process that follows after that. So like if you have an illegal voting problem in your precinct. But there's actually a bill is just, I think, reintroduced in this General Assembly that will allow people to become poll watchers outside of their county, because we always have trouble in Philadelphia getting poll watchers every election because we don't have enough Republicans. And you know, of course, the Democrats have blocked this effort, you know, every time it's introduced, but that would be a great help to us to be able to have poll watcher volunteers from outside Philadelphia come in to help in the precincts in Philadelphia to make sure things are done properly. That requires a statute, you know, a state law change in order to get that, because technically it's always been supposed to be somebody local, you know, that would do that. But it's a very important function around election time, and usually your local party is supposed to coordinate those activities, but we never, ever, ever have enough help, ever. I mean, it takes a lot of work to do that right, because you need people inside the poll, you need people outside the poll, you need people making phone calls, and it's very, very labor intensive.
But it's not something requires people to be out of their house, you know, twice a month or anything. I mean, it's essentially at elections, correct?
Correct.
So somebody who finds out about this and says, you know, I can't do that, I don't have enough time, your response would be, this is a twice a year event, primary and general election? Yeah,
I mean, usually, depending on the situation, like if you're concerned about the presidential election, that would be a general election. I mean, if you're worried about the primary, yeah, it would be a primary function. But usually those are general election functions when, you know, you're worried about shenanigans going on in the cities, you know, and, you know, all kinds of voter fraud. But another thing is like on general elections, there's a lot of voter fraud with absentee ballots. So there have been times where people have contested the absentee ballots, and you have to do that on election day. I think you do that in the polling place. It's done by a poll watcher. They go in and there's a method to contest all the absentee ballots, and then they have to go through them all, and there's a process for that. So but if you don't have a poll watcher in there, you can't do it. So if there's fraud with absentee ballot, like think about absentee ballots. I mean, there's so many deceased people on the voter rolls, and if somebody was organized, they could go in and cast absentee ballots for all these, if they had a certain amount of information for all these deceased people, if they were really organized. And, you know, who knows what goes on. And I mean, this kind of stuff goes on. They put a lot of effort into, you know, maximizing their voter turnout this way.
You're absolutely right, Lois. And if there's not a poll watcher in a particular place, there could be cheating going on left and right, but who's to know about it? So these are really important positions that any person, any citizen trained could do. It's not super demanding on somebody's schedule, except at one time of the year, you have to put the effort in. So, but this sounds like a great deterrent of voter fraud, to have citizens overseeing the process. And
you can become an election official. The people that work inside the poll, There's basically 3 elected people in the precinct. There's a judge of elections, and that can be anybody, and that's the person who's in charge of everything. But there's 2 overseers, there's 2 inspectors supposed to be from different political parties. They can't be from the same political party. Usually there's a Democrat and a Republican. And anybody can run for those positions, and their job there is to oversee everything and make sure it's done correctly. So those are really, really important jobs, and nobody hardly ever runs for them. They're usually just, they're plucked randomly because nobody runs for them and nobody's aware of what these positions are. But every 4 years they're elected, and you need 10 signatures on a petition to get your name on the ballot so your neighbors can elect you to do that twice a year. And
I dare say that many citizens don't. I wonder how many of them know about these positions, them being unfulfilled in many states, not just in Pennsylvania. I would think it's across the country. You had also mentioned to me the office of constable.
Yes.
Can you describe what that is, and that
Yes.
there's a lack of constables?
Yes. And most people think of constables as the people that go serve warrants and help transport the prisoners to to and from the prison. But that was really not the main function of the constable, or I guess it was one function, but they also have an oversight function on election day, overseeing their polling places in their jurisdictions. And a constable may have more than one polling place, but they can appoint deputies for election day to help them. And the constables are like police of election day. Bless you.
Thank you.
And their job is to police the polling place and to make sure everything is run properly. And if there are problems, the constable is the only one allowed in there that can go in and stop some illegal activity. They have the jurisdiction to do that. There's something going on. So, for example, say you go in the polling place and there's a big poster of Elizabeth Warren, on the wall or something. That's illegal. So if you ask them to take it down, they don't have to. But the constable can go in there and they can, they have the legal authority to take it down, and anything else that's going on that's illegal.
So the constable can go from polling place to polling place? Is that what in their county?
In their jurisdiction, like, for example, if you're a constable in a township, depends on how many precincts are in your township, but the constable can appoint deputies for election day, and then the deputy will have the same powers as the constable. That's my understanding. And so he can appoint a different person for each precinct, so everything is covered. But this doesn't happen unfortunately too regularly as it should. And all these they get paid for the day. I mean, it's not a ton of money, but they do get paid something for their service. So you can get at least compensated a little bit for doing that. But there's a constables association in Pennsylvania, and they people can get in touch with them, and they can find out from their county I think prothonotary if they've got an elected constable in their jurisdiction, and if they don't, they can actually apply to be appointed.
So does every state have a constable association?
I really don't know how it works in other states. I would imagine a lot of states are similar,
okay.
But I'm not sure how it works in other states.
Well, this is encouraging to me so far, Lois, because my take on this insanity against building a wall and getting rid of ICE is simply because these people view these illegals as their voting bloc. That's my take. That's my personal take. And I think many citizens think that way too. What I see is, regardless of what letter is after your name, many, many more people are against this illegal immigration when they see how political it is. So if the case is presented accurately to the citizenry, and they understand that they can have a part in holding back fraud in elections, what do you think the response would be taken? You're on the front lines. Do you find that people are becoming more aware of these things and would be active and take one of these positions?
Yeah, I think they would if they understood, how important they were. I think it's, I look at it as a function of your local committee people in the political parties to kind of make sure we have these functions filled but they don't do that because they're not trained to do that. But your local committee people are elected in the precincts, and they could make sure They should be in touch with all the voters in the precinct. They should make sure you have election officials, constables, poll watchers on election day, and all that stuff. And if you're working in your precinct regularly, then you can kind of get to know people and learn a little bit about maybe what you can ask of them, after working in your neighborhood after a period of time. But I don't see any shortcuts in it. You have to find a way to reach out to your neighbors in your precinct. Somebody's got to be in charge of the communication, and you can't always think somebody else is going to do it. Now, even your county party, I mean, the job of communicating with all the citizens around election time it's a humongous undertaking. There's just not enough money to do it, so it's really the local committee person's function to reach out. And you mentioned about the voting block, increasing the voting block with these illegal immigrants, but there's an awful lot of Americans who don't vote, and we should be talking to them and try. You're not going to change their mind overnight, because a lot of them are very stubborn non-voters. But over a period of time, I've seen people. I mean, we saw over the Trump election, a lot of people registered to vote either for the first time or they hadn't voted in decades. So
I heard those same reports from other parts of the state, Lois.
And we've even seen with local elections. I had a candidate a few years ago running for state house, and we had people registering to vote because they wanted to vote for him. Like, he inspired them to want to vote. And so sometimes it could even be a local election, not necessarily presidential. You never know what might inspire people if they, if you can get them involved a little bit into whatever is going on in your area.
I think we've seen clearly demonstrated, Lois, that people will vote for one of their own kind. My perception is that the political class is in danger. The trial lawyers that predominate in one party are in trouble. The gig is up for a lot of people. You can't fool all the people all the time. And all this turmoil, so often in a crisis, there's tremendous opportunity. The Chinese definition of a crisis is opportunity riding on a dangerous wind. And this is a great time in so many areas of our culture for the everyday citizen to step in and fill the voids and the gaps that are being left there and take back power, which our founding fathers originally intended.
Right. And, one of the good things that Trump's been doing that I'm very much in favor of is a lot of the deregulation he's been doing, and trying to put things, getting the federal government out of a lot of things and reducing regulations. And, what happens after, if you can get the federal government out of things, the state governments are in charge of a lot of things. Like one of the things is education, but they are in charge of a lot of things. And we don't have people who are anywhere near as informed as they need to be about what goes on in their state legislature. And in fact, I get a daily email from the General Assembly telling me what new bills have been introduced into these various committees, and I, glance through it, and I usually really watch for education issues, because there's so many shenanigans going on with education, and I just identified 2 really bad bills that were just introduced, and so I started working on that and getting people together to fight these bills when the legislature goes back into session in March. So, but the average person just isn't paying attention to this, or to what their local legislators are voting on, or any of these issues. And things don't end at the federal government. There's a whole lot of really bad things going on at the state level, and even your local school districts that can be addressed. And a lot of us have stopped things at the local level just by showing up and expressing some concerns and pointing things out to our elected officials, just as one person. But one person isn't going to change the United States Constitution. That's a humongous effort, but we can do a lot of things locally. And if you get involved locally and you get organized, you can use that organization to do bigger things when the opportunity arises. It's like you're preparing your army for opportunities that come later. But if you're not prepared, you're not going to be effective when you have those opportunities later.
Boy, you stole my thunder there, Lois. I'm a big on education and communication, and how we have what's the word I'm looking for? Defaulted on that. But we have organizations like Ashley, Americans for Prosperity, Commonwealth Foundation, Citizens for Alliance Pennsylvania, who do a lot of the work for us. And they do
they have to pick their battles, and they can't do everything. In fact, the things that
as far as the educational part, Lois, Anna McCausland gets great information. Ashley, Beth Ann, it would take us, the working person, days and hours to find out the information they do, which very, very few of us have. How to use that information. Lois, I would like to hear you speak about what value, if any, of calling or emailing, showing up in Harrisburg, visiting, making an appointment and visit. That stuff that's been around forever. What is your take on that?
Well, it's tricky dealing with legislators, because the only thing they really care about is getting reelected. And you have to understand that about legislators. And if they don't feel threatened by you, they will yes you to death, and then they'll turn around and just do what they're going to do anyway, because they want you to like them and they want to be reelected. So whenever they tell you something, what you have to tell yourself is, how do they benefit if I believe that? And because they'll tell you what they want you to believe, right? And
what if you show up in numbers? What if you get a neighborhood together and you say, hey, come on, let's go in mass, and let's get 5 to 7 or 10 to 12 people to go down, make an appointment? Does that make a difference?
Well, they have there are protests all the time in Harrisburg, and they don't in themselves make a difference. They can have a purpose, but a protest in itself is not going to really have too much of an impact unless you use it in conjunction with a full strategy. The most important thing about like defeating a bill or getting a bill passed are phone calls. And if you can do them strategically and have repeated phone calls to legislators' office, because they absolutely hate taking phone calls about legislation. And if you can have a phone call on a steady basis coming in, that is the most effective way. And then they have to be done correctly, though. You have to make sure, you need to be polite and respectful, and, deal with them as if they were human, and you have to ask for a written response, and you have to make sure you get one. And so you need to do that. I mean, in-person visits, I think sometimes you have to do them, but you can't rely on them. You have to do them in conjunction with or galvanizing your constituency for political pressure, because the legislators have to feel pressured, like they have to believe that if they don't do what you want them to do, they have a risk of losing their reelection, because that's all they care about. And you have to look at it that way. And that's why it's dangerous to become too friendly with legislators, because then you start to think they're like humans and they're really a different breed. Like they're really not like us. They have a different mindset, and you can't think of them as being regular humans, because they're not. So you just need to go in and you can give them the information, but don't think that they're going to act on being rational. They're going to act on what they believe is in their political interest.
Yeah, we all know how that goes. Say one thing and do another. But what I like to switch gears a little bit. One of the burdens here for me with conversations on the culture is education. Mm-hmm. I'd like to believe that an informed voter is the greatest deterrent to tyranny, because as I was reading an article today, when politicians get it in their mind that they have all the answers, they can solve problems, that's where tyrants and regimes grow out of. And I personally see that, I'm just speaking for myself, I see that happening in one party. Government take care of everything. I mean, they're going to solve, you name it, they're going to solve it. Very, very, very dangerous. So I'm of the mindset that when you can educate people and tell them, when you can do comparisons between tyranny and a constitutional republic and show them from history and current history too, that hopefully they'll draw the right conclusions. Lois, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think both political parties are pretty much the problem, and I think that the Trump presidency has really illuminated that in a big way. And the higher you go up the ladder, the more they are the problem, which is why if you work to get good people elected more at the local level, at the state level, you can get more accomplished, because they tend to be, they're more conservative, and there's a little bit less pressure from there's not as quite of a much of a swamp as there is in Washington, D.C., where I don't think the average person has any clue how much pressure there is from the swamp to keep things the way they are. And so we have to elect more people to Congress who have proven that they can resist the swamp by resisting the swamp at their state government level. And then we have to promote those people when they've already demonstrated to us they can resist the swamp. And, you know, over the years, I've had different metrics of how I evaluate a candidate. And now my most important criteria for a candidate is how they can resist pressure from other powerful politicians and special interests. And it's very hard to find that people like that, and people that don't get sucked into that swamp. And it's funny, I don't know if you're familiar with Congressman Thomas Massey, but he does this really funny speech. And I don't know how he keeps a sense of humor, because he knows how bad it is in Washington, but he has a great sense of humor. And he tells a story about how when good legislators get elected, good people, they get elected in Washington, they come to Washington and they become zombies. He calls them zombies because they get sucked into the culture, the Washington culture. And they about the fundraising. And, you know, he said, he tells a story about, he has it on his Facebook about how that when he first got in there, he's trying to do certain things, and they tried to buy him off they told him, some special interest group said they were going to like spend a lot of money to get him on the appropriations committee. And that's like a really powerful position. And they were going to lobby for him to get on there. And once you get sucked into that power thing, you know, now you owe people something. Now, if somebody does that for you and gets you in a powerful position like that, nobody gets into those powerful positions without owing people big time, right? Mm-hmm. And so he's telling this story about, you know, just about that, you know, that swamp culture and how easy it is for people to get sucked into that. Because think about the kind of people that run for Congress. A lot of them have big egos to begin with. So, you know, they like people coming to them and telling them they can make them even more powerful, you know? So it's like an occupational hazard, you know? And so that's like my first criteria is, can this person stick to their principles and resist the pressure, or are they just hungry for more power, more attention, and more glory? You know, do they just want to be loved by everyone? Because that's the wrong kind of person for those positions. You need people who really can just resist that, and, you know, they're really hard to find. If you find one, you know, they're really worth working for.
I happen to agree. I think you're absolutely nailing it. Anybody have any questions, comments? Please chime in. Just really appreciate everything Lois is sharing with us tonight. And I really appreciate, you know, the people that we're around are working people. So many are working more than one jobs. So time is a precious commodity. And some of the things that you're describing are not, when they're on, they're like super time intensive, but it's not repetitive. You know, it's just a once or twice a year type of activity.
Well, one thing I would recommend for people, if they limited time and all that, and I understand that, if you have an issue or something you find out about that you really want to fight a specific bill or something, the best thing you can do, the most effective thing you could do, is make a phone call and try to get through, and make sure they take your name and your address. Make sure you tell them you vote, and tell them you want a written response back. And sometimes certain politicians are really hard to get through, like Pat Toomey. I don't think you can ever get through on the phone to Pat Toomey's office. I mean, you could try one of his local offices, but it's hard. But if you can't get through on the phone, you can leave a message. I guess then you can email. But like a lot of your local legislators, you can get through on the phone and tell them what your concerns are. Be courteous. Write down exactly what you want to say. Have reasons for your position, and ask for a written response and tell them that you're a voter and this is really concerning to you. And also share it with your local political party, the people in your local political party, because they tend to always support incumbents, right? So if you share with your local political party that you're really unhappy about something one of the legislators is doing, about to do, or maybe did, that's good information for them. Because they're usually more in contact with these people, and that's good feedback, because they may have connections with possible challengers if they think this person is a weak candidate. So, don't just communicate with your elected official. Find other people who in your area who maybe can help you, like either by making another call or by getting that communication to people who are connected with the party or that politician. Don't just live in a vacuum. You know what I mean? If you can work with other people in one way or another, that's always better. You can just multiply your effectiveness.
Helps in life. Ashley gives you a second. Yes, demand a response, and appreciate that. So don't be a wilting violet, folks. Stand your ground and let them know you mean business. You're not just letting off steam. Now, I have a really good question here from Diane. What kind of resume do you need to run for school board? And how do you run for offices like that, a township supervisor, that type of thing, Lois?
Well, running for school board, that's a really good question, because there's a lot of skills that go into being on the school board. And I think it's almost impossible for one person to have all the skills that go into being a good school board member. That's another issue I tried to address when I got on the school board, and they didn't quite go for it. But there are a lot of good skills. You don't have to have all of these skills, but a lot of skills that would be helpful. Being a financial person, if you know how to read balance sheets and read financial statements, that's a good skill to have. If you are a person in the construction or building industry or understand those issues, that's really good, because school districts get into all kinds of construction projects, and if you are knowledgeable about that, that can be really helpful on the school board, because they get away with a lot of shenanigans for construction projects. You have to be able and willing to read, because there's a lot of stuff to read when you're on school board. So you can't be afraid of reading a lot of stuff. If you're a fairly quick learner, that's a good skill, because there's a lot to learn when you get on the school board. If you have a real interest in the actual nitty-gritty of education, I think that's the most important criteria, because there's a lot you can learn on your own if you just have that interest. Now, that does take does take time to invest to get up to speed on some of those things, but I think the interest, the will to do it, is the most important thing, and not to be intimidated by people with PhDs after their name and your administration. They're not always smarter than you just because they have a PhD after their name. I actually don't have a whole lot of regard for education PhDs personally, but sometimes it's good for somebody who's not a trained, educator, to look at these things from just a consumer's point of view, especially if you have kids in the school district, or you have kids that have gone through the school district, because then you've seen the results of it. And really, the results are what matters, really, right?
Well, Lois, let me share with you and everybody else while I'm at it. I was talking to some ladies here in Montgomery County, Republican Federation ladies, well, whatever the group is, you know what I mean. But we have one party rule in Montgomery County right now, all Democrat, and lo and behold, guess what's happening? why the school board is edging out competition for bids. And the ones who are winning the bids have jacked up the price significantly, and they seem to be connected to school board folk. And yeah, and one of the things I think a forum like this can address is give out, this is information that doesn't see the light of day too much because much of local media, unfortunately, is left-leaning. So this is what voters in our counties need to know, these things. That's really important information, Lois.
Well, as far as the legal end of the school, I'm glad you brought that up because there are some resources. First of all, you can read the school code, because that's a public document, and that is all the legal information, how the schools are run. So you can actually go online and read that thing. It would take you a little bit, but you can read it. The solicitor of your school district, they are, the legal guidance for everything your school board does. You don't have to listen to the solicitor, but he will, answer legal questions and give you advice. There's another resource. It's Pennsylvania School Board Association, and most school districts are members of the acronym is PSBA. And even though they're very left-leaning and they're very pro-education establishment, I call it, they do have resources to help school board members with different aspects of governance and school board. So, like, for example, putting out projects to bid. Like, you could read up on that from PSBA. If you're a school board member, you have access to all that information, and they can help you. So I have found that some of the information I've gotten from them have been very helpful. That if I go in and take advantage of their educational things, and they will give you access to other school board members across the state. And you have to be careful, I guess, who you talk to, but there are resources there to help school board members. And we don't really have a good statewide network of conservative school board members, but we have a little bit of network.
Is it legal for the conservative school board members to get together with their committee people and say, look, there's some information that needs to get out to your precincts? Is that legal? Can they do that?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
The only thing school board members can't share are things like lawsuits that are pending with the school district, or like personnel issues that are private, but anything else is pretty much all public information. Even your union contracts are public information. Even your superintendent contract is public information. You can go look at that and see exactly all the terms of your contract with your school superintendent.
Awesome. Does the school board have any input into the curriculum in their district? Another great question from Diane.
That's a great question, and that's been probably my biggest frustration as being on the school board, because I've been a no vote on several textbooks that our school district has adopted, and I've been the only no vote. And one complaint I get from people has been, well, do you have a better suggestion? And my response is, well, I have offered to be involved early on in the curriculum process to help review curricula, but I don't get invited to the meeting, so I don't know what they're doing, and we don't get reports on what they're at. We get very general reports. We don't get, well, we're looking at this, that, and the other thing. They have a way of communicating with you to keep everything kind of nebulous, if you know what I mean. Like, you're on a need to know basis. They don't want to give you everything till it's already done, and then you're in a position where you either have to vote yes or no, and you had no input. So that is entirely up to your board, how much they want to get involved in the actual curriculum adoption process. I think in today's day and age, the board have to have clear instructions to their administration what they want out of their curriculum. And because otherwise you're getting a lot of left-wing garbage. I mean, literally it's garbage, and it should not even be in the schools. So it's a very, very difficult problem, because you have an entrenched establishment of interest in the education, in the whole education community. This is nationwide. Wow. So if you're not in there digging deep, and if you're only one member, the best you're going to do is bring it to light to your community, and then maybe you can recruit more members for the next election. And sometimes that's the way you have to look at it.
Awesome. And are board members welcome in the school buildings? Are they allowed to visit at will?
Well, that's another great question. In fact, that was one of the first things I did when I got elected, and I told them I wanted to come in and observe some of the classrooms, and I did that. And they were pretty welcoming to me for the most part, and I got a lot of good information, and I enjoyed doing that. And you really learn a lot by observing. I've had a little difficulties with my school district in the last couple of years, so I've been a little more gun shy about going in there, but I do want to go back in. And you know, one of the first things I did when I ran for school board is I made appointments with all the principals in our school district, and just one-on-one interviews, just informational interviews, to learn about how things were going in their buildings, and you know, what were their challenges and what would they like to change. And I did this in good faith, and I really wanted to know. And that's a great thing to do, to reach out to those people when you're running, and to give people the benefit of the doubt that most of them really do want to do right by the kids, and they're not really sinister. Most of them aren't really sinister people, but we're all kind of victims of this system. We're all kind of caught up into it, and those people are just trying to get their job done every day. Their jobs are so hard, and we've got just set up this system that really doesn't work very well for all of our kids.
Make education local. I think you would agree with that, Lois.
Absolutely. As local as possible.
Indeed. I would like to, there's so much more we could go into. Lois, I think we're going to have ongoing conversations with you here and there. One of the takeaways for me tonight is being involved in the voting process is very important. Yes, very, very important.
Absolutely.
I learned a lot. Phone calls. Well, I know about that from my experiences with AFP. And for those of you who don't know about Americans for Prosperity, they have chapters in most of the states. And the reason I'm mentioning to them is they pay people to do activism, to find out information that you don't hear in Philadelphia area. The station is 6 ABC, Action News. You know, if you want to find out about what's going on in Harrisburg, you have a really, really difficult time finding out what's actually happening. There's just, you know, so much news fluff now. I think many of us agree with that. So they are putting out newsletters and getting information out. So I recommend that you check that out, check them out. They also have, Lois, I think you would agree with me, their trainings are extraordinary, and to help you become an activist and make a difference in your backyard. And, you know, and I always stress, you know, and Ashley, I know you would second this. You got all kinds of people. Some of them have an hour a month, some of them have more, but every little bit helps. It's so important for us to be contributing now, especially Lois. I'd love to hear you speak to this the next time. The activism going on in the state, the organization on the blue side. And I'm not saying that to freak people out, oh, it's over before it starts. No, it's not, but just to know that being involved is imperative in one way or another to keep Pennsylvania red in the next election.
Yes, if you could, you know, if you could be a resource for people in your local neighborhood, you know, for information at election time, that is something most people don't have. That would be such a big contribution that anybody could do around election time to help their neighbors, especially this is a local election year. You take the time to get to know the candidates. The petitions are going to be filed early March. You know, anybody can go in and find out all the petitions that are filed at their county courthouse, can get a list of all the local candidates, and could send them letters, could send them a survey. I mean, anybody could do this. It's public information. You could get a lot of information on these candidates and share them with your neighbors. And this is something you can get a group of people together. You may have a Tea Party group where you live. If you don't, you might have some other kind of group. You know, you could start a league of women's voters. You don't have to. You could just get some friends together and do this. This is something anybody can do. And you could start compile information that could help people, help your local neighbors. And once people get to know you as somebody who's involved and active, you will start, it's like a snowball effect. It's like an algebraic curve, you know, that people will start to come to you and talk to you about things. You will get more and more information. You'll learn even more, and you'll be surprised at what will develop. If you take a few initial steps on your own, it really, it's amazing what you will find out.
I agree, Lois. This is a very doable, very practical. Anybody can do this. So I'm very grateful for you sharing with us. Thankfully, Judy Fraser brought it to my attention because I forget more than I remember these days. We're having a prayer time at 9 o'clock. So anybody who wants to stay, it's not going to be recorded, but anybody who wants to stay on is welcome to stay with us, praying for the country. We're praying for the elections in our states and just all of these things that are going on in our country. Lois, it seems like within 24 hours, the news cycle these days, it's like, it's like a whirlwind, but, we do what we can in our corner of the world. We don't want to be consumed by this. We have lives, we have families, we have other interests, but the more people that are doing their part, the better it is. So I wanted to thank you so much. Pardon me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight.
I'm so glad that you did, and we'll visit with you again in the future. And so we're going to call it a night, folks. For those who want to stay on and pray with us, feel free to do so. I promise we're not going to be here for another 2 hours. I won't last that long. But Lois, thank you. If you want to stay or if you have to get going, do what you have to do. That's your call.
Okay. Thank you, Kim.
You're welcome. Have a good evening.
You too.
All right, Tyler, we are done recording.